Well, welcome back to another episode of the Always About People show. We're back in the studio. We're here in Charlotte, the Charlotte area. I know that I've been taking this show on the road to a couple clients over the last few weeks, but we're back here in the Charlotte area, and I've got a good friend with me today. This is Rick Hasty. Rick and I actually met 15 years ago. He was helping an organization. Yeah. He was helping an organization that I worked with around strategic planning and leadership development. And then I was a part of a group with Rick, and I've taken some of what he taught us 15 years ago. I've ripped it off. I'm careful about saying I've stolen it, but I've used it for years in some of the teaching and leadership development that I've been doing on my own. So I guess I should say thank you.
Well, apparently that's a compliment. So I'm going to take it as that. And I really, really appreciate it. But as I recall, Chris, the last time we were really working on this, you didn't have any gray hair.
No, I got gray hair now. Hey, shh.
And I don't think I did either, actually.
Yeah. Well, life has a way of doing that to all of us. So, but again, thank you for joining us live on the Always About People show. We try to come to you every week with some relevant, practical content around people, around leadership, around how the current culture is affecting leaders and people in the world. And so I'm excited about today's topic. Rick has been doing leadership development. He's passionate about this topic. And so this is going to be a fascinating conversation. Buckle up, get a notebook, take notes with a phone, an iPad, whatever, because I believe that these principles are not just going to be helpful things to write down, but we will hope to leave you with really practical insights that you can take with you. So again, the topic of today's show, 4 powerful principles for every leader. And our job is to make those practical. Whether you're watching us live on YouTube, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn, we encourage you to leave comments, ask questions. We'll get to them on the show. We promise that we'll leave some space, but man, I'm excited to jump into this conversation. Let's start here. Rick, I want to know, how'd you get so passionate about leadership in the first place? I've known it for 15 years.
Well, and I have been passionate about it much longer than that, as you might imagine. I think it probably it stirs a desire within us when we're around great leaders to be like them. In fact, I know that's true. Research says that's true. And a long time ago, as the company I was a part of and it had founded at that time began getting excited about leadership, we did our own survey among executives, 100 of them. And those executives told us how important leadership was. But we found a very interesting thing. I'd done many surveys. I'd been a part of sales and marketing organizations, and surveys were a big part of the world then, as they are today. And one of the things that I had never seen before came up in the survey we did. When we asked executives, what had the biggest influence on you being where you are today?
Okay, before you tell.
Yes.
For those of you who are watching, I want you to write down right now the answer to this question before he gives you what they found. What had the greatest influence on you as a leader? Is that how you asked the question?
That's exactly how we asked it.
All right. So this is your chance to answer the question yourself. And now, ta-da.
The answer was universal. I'd never seen a group of people, much less high-ranking executives, answer a single question a single way. And their answer was a person. Interestingly, that person 75% of the time had a significant positive impact on them. 25% of the time, that person had a negative impact on them. And the result of that negative impact was they determined they wanted one day to be a manager, a leader, and to give a positive impact on the people around them.
Yeah. So again, whether you wrote that down or not, most people, majority of people would say, I became a leader because of the influence of one person that led me previously. And it was a positive experience, more than likely. However, if it wasn't, I am going to become a leader.
That's right.
So that I can outlead what I experienced.
Yeah, quite a paradox, you might say. But nevertheless, they were inspired by another individual 100% of the time. And it could have been more than one individual, but they almost always referred to a single individual as the biggest influence. One of the things I think, as a side note here, is that it was amazing when we were talking to them how when they had a positive experience, they oftentimes were referring back to something that might have occurred very early in their career, 20, even 30 years earlier, and their faces just lit up talking about them and what it meant to them to have someone pour themselves into them as young people in their career.
Yeah. I think in some of our research as well, and anytime we lead a conversation around this, we'll ask people, hey, so what influenced your leadership? We're seeing the same results.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people are going back to youth sports coaches, teachers,
very interesting.
People that influenced them at a very early age. And yet I think this is why both of us are so passionate about this topic. If we know that we can influence lives in such a positive way, then we need to get better at leadership.
Well, and that did lead us to researching more than just do we need leaders and how are leaders influenced, but to recognize that there are approaches you can take that are very effective. And so the result of that survey was a lot of work, really about 5 years of work that went into understanding what are the most effective ways to build leaders.
Yeah.
So the irony here is that we found that the most effective way to build leaders is to take the emphasis off yourself and put it on them.
Sounds like humility.
Well, that is a great word to use. What we noticed was that if what you're trying to do is inspire people to be great leaders, that it really takes yourself spending time with them. And so to be effective at it, though, it can't be that complicated. And so as we looked at the many, many books, and there are great authors, whether you're talking about people like go way back to Jim Collins or Ken Blanchard, Peter Drucker. These are people that early on, 20 now, 30 years ago, we're talking about the importance of leadership as we moved out of a time when everyone wanted to talk about management. And we moved to really a different concept, which was really around leading people as opposed to managing them. And of course, those two things interact a lot. But the terminology today, and if you looked at Google and tried to find how many books out there are on management, it'd be pretty small. I can tell you 30 years ago when we started that plight, that's all you could find.
Well, I think that part of this, Rick, is also, you could even go further back to like Rockefeller habits. I mean, you can keep going back. Covey has done a lot of work, but it almost feels like out of the Industrial Revolution, Taylorism, this idea that we could scientifically monitor people and their activities and their roles just requires a decent manager.
Yeah, and a great example, by the way, is that the reason Walmart exists today is because of the way that Sam Walton was treated as a manager at JCPenney.
Really?
He hated it. And he believed that he could start a company that would treat people differently.
So he was one of the 25% that said, I'm going to do this differently.
That's exactly right. And I suspect that 25% probably represents a lot of examples in the marketplace who've left one place to go do it better someplace else. And of course, doing it better almost always means treating people differently. Another supporting bit of research there is that a Gallup and the significant work they've done around employee engagement shows that the large majority of the time when people leave a job, it's because of their manager.
Yep. They join companies and leave managers.
That's exactly right.
All right. So as you were looking at all these models and reading all these books to try and put together, how do we keep this simple? I mean, you and I have gone back and forth. We've talked about all the leadership books, 17 this, 15 this, 21
Right.
this, 5 this, 7
Right.
this, whatever. But how do we keep this simple? You kind of developed these 4 principles. And I would love for us to now get into some real practical for the viewers who are watching. Where did you come up with these 4 principles? And let's just start into that conversation.
Well, the 4 principles really came out of recognizing that if you wanted to not only be a good leader and build good leaders, but you wanted to create a culture in which your organization naturally built other leaders, that it couldn't be complicated.
Yeah.
And we discovered, if you read John Maxwell and Ken Blanchard and Drucker and Jim Collins and go through the long list, Simon Sinek today, that you'll find that they all share common principles. They just call them different things. And in some cases, if it's Maxwell, there's 21 of them. And others, it's 15 or 11. But who can remember 11 things?
Yeah.
And so we tried to find what's the irreducible number. And we believe we did. And they've remained static now for about 15 years. They're very simple. And in fact, I would say that if you want to be a great leader, it really only requires you focusing on 2 things.
Oh, I'm on the edge of my seat.
It really requires, first of all, that you focus on care. How do I demonstrate care to my teams? And what care is simply, it is the way in which you show people that they are more important than the company itself.
Yeah.
We're not saying the company's not important and that you don't convey its importance. It's just simply that the way I treat people says to them that they are more important than my company is.
Sounds like always about people.
It absolutely is. It's about treating people really with an adage we've heard many, many times, which is treating them the way you'd like to be treated.
Yeah, so that's care.
That is care. The second one, though, really fits hand in hand. These are not really separate principles. These are principles that work together to demonstrate to others that you're the kind of leader they want to be around and want to learn from. And that second principle is clarity. One of the things we say is that clarity is really about answering the right questions, and care is about asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And so if you want to think about how do I deploy care, for instance, it's about asking things like, what's important to you? What do you think we should do? Where do you think we should go? Sometimes it's as simple as saying, how's your family?
Yeah. What's going on in your world?
Yes.
How are you doing in this new remote environment?
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
And on a practical level, things like, what do you need to do your job better? What can I help you with to make you more productive?
So care is asking the right questions.
Right.
And clarity
is answering the right questions.
Yeah.
Such as, where are we going from here? What are our goals? What's most important to our company?
What's my job?
And especially on the individual level, things like, what is it that I need to be doing? How do I need to focus my time?
That's great. So asking the right questions and answering the right questions. You said something earlier, we flew by it, but both of these things require one thing that most leaders say they don't have. That's time.
Right.
And in the whirlwind, as some have said, of our days, when we're moving from one task to another, one meeting to another, most of the leaders that I'm talking to are saying, it's difficult for me to get time to even ask the right questions and answer the right questions. What would you say to that leader?
Well, I would say to that leader, just step back for a second and answer the question, what is the most important thing you could be doing right now? And while leaders have lots of things on their plate, they can't be ruled by the tyranny of the urgent and not be a good leader. And so what happens to them is that they get sucked into lots of things that seem urgent at the moment, but it's not necessarily the highest and best use of their time. In the case of the future of their company and what's in their best interest, what we've observed, and I think this is not new news to people, is that capital, budgeting, strategy, all of those things that are important to a leader aren't nearly as important as finding and developing the right people on their team. And so if that's the highest and best use of their time, then you have to ask, why are you not demonstrating care and clarity? Because that's how your people are going to see you as the best leader they've ever worked for.
So, Rick, that caused me to think about another question, which is something that we hear from leaders pretty regularly. And that is, I feel like more and more responsibility is falling upon me as the leader. And I just don't have anyone that I can delegate to.
Right.
That triggers a few thoughts in my mind. Like, first of all, why can't you delegate to them?
Right.
What is it that is causing you to believe that you can't? Where's the lack of trust, etc.? To those leaders, just making sure that we connect with everybody who's watching the show, to those leaders who say, I'm trying, but I can't.
Right.
Where's the hang up? Where are we stuck?
Well, that does perfectly lead us into the second two principles. So again, I just say, if you want to be the greatest leader that anybody's ever worked for, then demonstrate care and clarity. On the other hand, if you want to more rapidly develop leaders, then you need to cultivate learning and accountability. Once again, those two go hand in hand. They don't operate separately. And in fact, all four of these principles really interact with each of them. So in the case of learning and accountability, learning is really about giving people things to do they've never done before.
Yeah.
It's really extending their skill set into areas that perhaps they've not explored in the past. But most of all, it's about taking risk. So as a leader, particularly if you're in an entrepreneurial world where you started and you grow up and you've kind of done it all, the chances are you do it better than anybody.
Yep.
So it's a risk to be willing to give someone responsibility that you know you would do better. And yet, if you care more about them and about them being developed as a leader than you do about yourself and maybe even about your company, then that empowers you to allow people to take on risk, to take on new responsibilities that they've never done before.
That made me think of, and I can't pronounce his name, but he's a Hungarian psychologist who coined the idea of flow. And that flow is this space that is at the proper level of your skill, but slightly more challenging than you are able.
That's right.
And if something is less than challenging for you, it creates boredom. If it's too challenging and above your skill level, it creates stress. But there's a space that this psychologist calls flow that is just slightly more challenging than you think you're able to do, which keeps you learning.
Well, along these lines, and this is one of the areas in which this concept of cultivating a learning came from, is that in that survey I was talking about at the beginning of our show, that one of the things that leaders described when they were describing that early relationship where they were inspired is that leader gave them something they didn't think they could do.
Yep.
The other thing that comes to mind is I was recently reading an article on the importance of self-esteem. The misunderstanding today in today's world, and is true with many parents, is they believe self-esteem is something you give someone, but actually it's something they earn. And so they earn self-esteem by doing things that they haven't done before, doing things that are difficult, a little bit like that seed you put in the ground, and it's healthier when it has to burrow itself up through hard ground than if it just comes up through soft ground. It might grow faster in soft ground, but it's more healthy if it comes through a little bit of a difficult start.
Well, what that just triggered for me is, and we've talked about it here on the show before, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs, pretty simplistic, but it starts with physiological needs,
right?
Then safety needs, which is actually where your job was in his initial pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
Then love and belonging. Everybody needs to feel loved and belonging. Then self-esteem. But instead of even thinking of it like that's something you give to people, it's something that I develop within myself by taking on new challenges and learning. And then at the top of his pyramid is self-actualization, becoming the best version of myself.
Right.
And so I think we're seeing a workplace move into no longer work just being a fulfillment of safety needs, but work being a place that helps me feel loved and belonging, helps me grow and challenged in my self-esteem, and helps me become the best version of myself. And so, okay, learning, fourth principle.
Yeah, and again, as I said, it goes hand in hand, because what is important, even essential, you might say, certainly as a way to reinforce a culture of learning, is accountability. What we know, there's certainly plenty of psychobabble around not giving grades, and that's not important, and it hurts self-esteem. But the reality is when we earn things that you might say easy come, easy go, if it's too easy, we can lose self-esteem just as quickly as we gained it. If it's hard fought, hard won, it doesn't go away very easily. But part of that hard fought, hard won is actually holding people accountable. Just because I might do it better and I delegate it to you does not mean I don't expect you to do it as well as I do it.
Yeah.
And so that's what requires the concentration, the learning environment in which I do what it takes to please the people around me and to perform in a way that it's expected of me. And I know I'm going to be held accountable. And accountability, by the way, just as a quick side note, isn't just about me holding my subordinate accountable, but it's their ability to hold me accountable. So that if I go back to the care cycle and I say, what can I do to help you? And they give me something, they have a right to expect me to actually deliver on that promise. And so the four concepts of care, clarity, learning, and accountability all work together to creating an environment in which people observe great leadership skills, and then they participate and are accelerated in their development of those skills.
So when I think about learning and accountability, I know that many of the leaders that we're talking to in organizations around the country, that accountability piece is the tough one, because I'm delegating something to somebody. I'm trying to help them learn how to do it.
Right.
But they never meet my expectations. So help us understand the connection between learning and accountability, and then back to care and clarity. How do we help these leaders practically understand, okay, that's the situation, you've delegated something, the expectation hasn't been met.
Right. How
do I remain a leader that cares and provides clarity?
Well, obviously, I would say that happens very frequently. And accountability really then brings you back to, how do I communicate effectively with care and clarity? I was having a conversation with an organizational leader the other day who was struggling with someone who was had performed very well, and in fact was getting ready to leave his organization and move to another role. And so he was debating with me in a recent assignment, he had really fallen short. And so he was asking me, should I should I address that? And I said, well, if you don't, it'll violate what you've tried to set as a part of your culture. That when I ask you to do something, take something in my place, I'm asking you to perform like I would perform. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about it, and the reality was he'd given good instructions. Sometimes that's not the case. So you have to examine yourself.
Yep.
Maybe I didn't provide clarity and ask him to do something, but I didn't give him good instructions. No, he had done that. He had also followed up with him on several occasions. So I would call that care. He had set a place where he didn't just give it one time, but he went back and checked and said, okay, everything going good. Do you need anything? And yet the performance was subpar. Yeah. And so I said, but the point here is it's your organization. He's working for you. He may be leaving soon, but don't miss this opportunity to give him an understanding of how he needs to perform in his next role. Yeah. And that he'll be held accountable.
Learning opportunity.
And so that accountability did, in fact, create a learning opportunity. And again, you see how they work together. So yes, he went to him, made a difference. The right exchange took place, but he wasn't asked to do something, to delegate something, and then just left alone. There was an expectation that he would perform at a high level.
All right. So we've given you the 4 principles. We've tied it as best we can to some practical application. Rick, I know with the few minutes that we have left, I am passionate about this because I'm hearing it in every organization. As organizations move to remote or hybrid work environments where people are in and out of the office, or sometimes you're working within a team that you've never actually met face-to-face on Zoom, not face-to-face in life or across the table. How do these 4 principles play out in what we're seeing is now a remote environment, or at least hybrid or flexible?
Well, I don't know if we have quite enough time, Chris, to cover that thoroughly.
Let's whet the appetite.
I would say the simplest thing in all of this is taking an empathetic approach to recognize what is it like, put myself in a remote environment and say, what do I need in order to do my job well? And I think what we've seen, you and I chatted about this a little bit earlier, is that it is a challenge. It's a challenge for leaders, and they're getting burned out too, right? Yeah. It is a challenge for them. And yet that's what it's going to take, is you've got to put yourself in the shoes of your employees and think of, what do I need if I'm remote? How do I operate that way? Do I have all the tools I need? And am I able to communicate all the people that I need to? And if not, you got to figure out how to make that happen.
That's good. Well, I want to just create a little bit of space for those of you that are watching with us live. If you have any questions, just a reminder, please send them in. Send in a comment. We'd love to address anything that you are asking or you're wondering right now live. And obviously, for those of you who may be watching this as a recording, you can still send in questions or comments, and we promise we'll respond to them. We'll see them, we'll respond, and we'll get back to you. Again, the purpose of this show is that we would cover topics and issues and really practical thoughts and struggles, maybe challenges would be the best word, that you're having within the workplace in your role as either an employee or a leader. And we try to cover those here. So today it was 4 principles for every leader. And we've covered this idea of care and clarity, because a leader needs to demonstrate care for the person and be clear about how they're answering the questions.
Right.
And then in terms of developing people, provide opportunities for learning and accountability.
Right.
And that those 4 powerful principles are things that every leader, whether you are at home leading kids, whether you're in a nonprofit, whether you are in a faith-based organization, whether you're in just a secular workplace,
right,
doesn't matter. These principles apply. Any last-minute thoughts that you've been thinking of? Tie a bow on this thing.
Well, the last thing I'd say is that the reason these are so powerful is they cover any situation. and perhaps we'll get a chance to talk about that sometime in the future. But because they're so simple, they're very easy to pass along.
Yeah.
And the result of that is they can proliferate throughout your organization. And you and I can talk about something we talked about 15 years ago, and it's just as relevant today as it was then.
Yeah. All right. Thank you to those of you who are watching this live. For those of you watching this as a recording, we're glad that you've tuned in again to another episode of the Always About People show. I would like to just ask that you take a moment over the next week, few days, to think through the leaders who have greatly impacted you, and think about how they cared for you, how they provided clarity, how they created opportunities for you to learn, and how they held you accountable. And that you would take those 4 powerful principles and that you would then pass them along as well. Thanks for joining us. Rick, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chris.
We'll see you next time.